Hey everyone, welcome back to English Audiobook Summary. Today, we're breaking down Can't Hurt Me, one of the rawest, most brutal memoirs ever written. This isn't a book about motivation. Goggins hates that word. This is a book about something much harder, taking a life that's been completely broken and rebuilding it, piece by piece, pain by pain, into something unbreakable. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a 297-pound exterminator, sleeping in his car, eating donuts to numb his shame, became one of the most disciplined humans on the planet. Let's go at this. Part 1. The House. Nobody could see inside. In 1981, the Goggins family lived in Williamsville, New York, a picture-perfect suburb of Buffalo. Nice houses, good schools. From the outside, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. But Goggins will tell you, what you see from the outside means nothing. His father, Toughness Goggins, ran a roller skating rink called Skateland. To the customers walking through the door, it looked like a fun family business. DJ booth, disco lights, a happy family running the show. Behind that image was something else entirely. David, his brother, and his mother worked. There, York, constantly, cleaning skates, selling snacks, scrubbing toilets late into the night, while every dollar that came through. The door went straight into his father's pocket. His mother didn't have her own bank account, didn't have her name on anything. His father never even married her, on purpose, so she'd have zero legal rights if she ever tried to leave. And at night, when the rink closed, and they got home, the real nightmare started. David was 6 years old, the first time he really understood fear. His father would call him into a dark room, belt in hand. No warning about how many hits were coming, or when it would stop. David's whole body would be covered in marks the next morning. Marks he had to hide, because if anyone at school saw a bruise, that meant another beating for embarrassing the family. Here's the part that still gets people. David never cried, not once. He'd stand there, mid-beating, and lock eyes with his father, refusing every single time to let the man feel like he'd actually won. His mother wasn't spared either. Screaming, leather belts. Police called more than once, and every time his father talked his way out of it before the cops even got out of the car. That's when a young David learned the lesson that would define the rest of his life. Nobody is coming to save you. You have to save yourself. The escape came when he was still a kid. His mother secretly built a credit card in her own name, got her husband to unknowingly co-sign it, and one day, without warning, looked at her sons and said, "I'm leaving. If you want to come, come now." David didn't hesitate for a second. They fled with almost nothing, hid at a neighbor's house, hit engine trouble on the highway in the middle of the getaway, and somehow still made it, all the way to his grandparents' house in Brazil, Indiana. His mother cried on the side of that road, not from fear this time, from relief. For the first time in his life, David Goggins was free. But freedom didn't erase what had already been carved into him. And what happened next, at a new school, in a new town, as the only black kid in a nearly all-white classroom, would test him in a completely different way. Classroom would. Part 2. The Kid Who Learned to Disappear. Freedom came with a price. 6 months after escaping his father, David's mother enrolled him in a new school, and academically, he was already years behind. He couldn't read at grade level. He'd barely learned anything at his old school, because he'd spent every night either being beaten or bracing for it. Patience, and one teacher, Sister Catherine, actually saw him. She gave him the extra time, the patience, the belief he needed. And slowly, he started catching up. Then they moved again. New school, new teacher, Miss D, and Miss D didn't have patience. When David bombed. A standardized test early in the year, she told his mother flatly. He needed to go to a special school. Every kid in that building knew exactly what special meant. Not normal. Different. Forever. Addiction. That single sentence became a trigger. David developed a stutter. He was terrified to speak in class. He was the only black kid in the room, already isolated, and now convinced he was broken on top of it. A doctor eventually labeled him ADHD and put him on medication. But the real diagnosis was something science now understands clearly: toxic stress. When a child is repeatedly abused, the brain's development actually slows down. It gets stuck in permanent fight or flight. Learning, memory, language, all of it suffers. Kids who go through what David went through carry a dramatically higher risk of depression, addiction, even prison later in life. He was, by every clinical measure, a textbook at-risk youth. Copying. So he found a coping mechanism: cheating. He got good at it, copying homework, glancing at test answers, and even cheating his way through a standardized exam. His grades looked fine on paper, but inside, he knew the truth. He wasn't learning anything. He was just disappearing further into the back row, hoping nobody would ever notice him. Then his mother met a man named Wilmoth Irving, and for a little while, for the first time in David's life, things felt normal. Wilmoth played basketball with him, taught him how to move on the court, and talked to him like he mattered. His mother started laughing again, started believing she deserved something good. Wilmoth proposed. There was a plan to move together as a family. Then, right after Christmas, Wilmoth was murdered, shot in his own garage. Nobody ever figured out why. Maybe a bad business deal, maybe something worse. David's mother collapsed into another breakdown. David punched a hole straight through the refrigerator. The one good thing that had happened to their family was just gone. By high school, David had reinvented himself again and again, trying on identities like armor, hip-hop culture, an old Chevy his grandfather gave him, which someone spray-painted with a racial slur, a gun pulled on him during a random encounter with strangers in a pickup truck where he stood completely still and just stared back, a drawing of himself hanging from a noose left inside his own school workbook that the principal brushed off as ignorance. Every year, he faked his way further through school, cheating on tests, coasting through classes, and the whole time, one voice kept repeating in his head, built from every insult, every slur, every special school comment he'd absorbed since childhood: "You were born to fail." Then came the letter. Senior year, a notice arrived saying he was on track to fail. If his grades and attendance didn't improve immediately, he wouldn't graduate. And with graduation on the line, so was his one real dream: joining the Air Force, like his grandfather. That night, David stood in front of a mirror and told himself the truth for the first time in his life. You're not stupid, you're just lazy. And the Air Force isn't going to take a liar. You can't change anything until you stop lying to yourself. That moment is where the accountability mirror was born, a ritual he'd use for the rest of his life. Every day, write down the truth, write down the goal, stick it on the mirror, and force yourself to look at it until it's done. He studied obsessively, rewrote every note by hand, built flashcards. In 6 months, he went from barely literate to passing his exams and hitting the minimum Air Force score. He'd finally found a purpose. But joining the Air Force was about to reveal something he wasn't ready for. Even with a diploma in hand, David Goggins was still, underneath it all, weak. And fixing that was going to take a lot more than willpower. Part 3. 297 pounds and 191 pounds apart. By his mid-20s, David was a mess. He'd joined the Air Force, then quietly quit the pararescue program he'd dreamed about, claiming a medical issue, when the truth was, he'd simply been too scared to face it a second time. He never told anyone that part. He just carried the shame. He buried that shame the way a lot of people do, in food. Every morning after his overnight pest control shift, he'd stop for a giant chocolate shake and a box of donuts, eat it alone in his car, then go home and eat a full breakfast on top of it when his mom called. His marriage was falling apart. His wife spent most of her time away. He weighed close to 300 pounds, hiding a broken, terrified man inside a body that looked big and strong. Then, one night, flipping channels, he landed on a documentary about Navy SEAL training. He watched men crawl through freezing surf, get screamed at for hours, and refuse to ring the quitting bell no matter how much their bodies begged them to stop. Something in him lit up. Not admiration, recognition. This is what I'm supposed to be. This is everything I'm not. He looked in the mirror. 300 pounds, 0 discipline, 0 skills, 0 hope. And for the first time, instead of shame, he felt something new. Fire. He called Navy recruiters every single day for 3 weeks. Every single one said no. Then he found one, Petty Officer Stephen Shaja, who actually listened. There was just one catch. To even qualify for SEAL training, David had to lose over 100 pounds, and he had 3 months to do it. 100 on, most people struggle to lose 10. He needed to lose more than 100, on a deadline while also retaking a military aptitude test he'd already failed once. He built a brutal daily routine. Up at 4:30 a.m., 2 hours of studying on a stationary bike, 2 hours of swimming, weight sets in the gym, more biking. 1 real meal a day, chicken, rice, and vegetables. Weighing himself twice a day, miss a single rep, and he'd drag himself back to the gym at night and punish himself until it was done. He was almost completely alone in this. His wife told him flatly. She wasn't coming with him on this path, so whenever the motivation ran out, he had a backup plan. Call his recruiter, play the Rocky soundtrack, and picture himself standing in a Navy SEAL uniform until the image felt real enough to keep moving toward. In 2 weeks, he lost 25 pounds. He kept going. The weight kept falling, and something else was happening at the same time. Every finished workout became proof that he wasn't the failure everyone always told him. When test day finally came, he scored high enough to qualify. He called his mother, screaming into the phone, "I did it. I'm going to be a SEAL." But the celebration came with a brutal choice attached. His recruiter told him this path meant everything else took a back seat, including his marriage. David chose the dream. Not because his marriage didn't matter, but because for the first time in his life, he was finally choosing himself, his own freedom, his own future, instead of just surviving whatever life handed him. He'd done what almost nobody believed was possible. He'd earned his shot. What he didn't know yet was that earning. The chance to become a Navy SEAL and actually surviving Navy SEAL training were 2 completely different fights, and the second one was about to nearly break him. Part 4. Hell Week and the Cookie Jar. Everyone who walks into Navy SEAL training knows about Hell Week before they even arrive. 5.5 days, barely any sleep, instructors screaming in the freezing dark, dragging trainees through the surf, pushing bodies past every limit they thought they had. It's not designed to build strength. It's designed to break people, so the instructors can see who's actually left standing when strength runs out. David wasn't the fastest guy in his class, wasn't the strongest. But he had one advantage nobody else had. He'd spent his entire childhood surviving pain that had no rules and no mercy. Cold water, screaming instructors, exhaustion. He'd trained for this his whole life without even knowing it. But surviving didn't mean it got easier. Stress fractures, pneumonia. His body was breaking down piece by piece, and doctors kept telling him the same thing. Stop. Most people would have. Sometimes quitting isn't weakness, it's wisdom. But David believed there was a difference between being injured and surrendering who you are. So every time his body screamed at him to stop, he asked himself one question. Is this actually the end? Or is this just discomfort trying to convince me it's danger? That distinction changed everything, because our brains are terrible at telling the two apart. A hard workout feels dangerous. A hard conversation feels dangerous. Starting something new feels dangerous. But feeling uncomfortable doesn't mean you're incapable. Usually, it means you're growing. Still, there were moments even David couldn't push through on willpower alone. That's when he built one of the most famous ideas in the entire book, the cookie jar. Here's what it means. Picture a jar filled with every hard thing you've already survived, every bad memory you overcame, every pound you lost, every moment you kept going when quitting would have been so much easier. Whenever life whispers, "You can't do this," you reach into that jar, not for comfort, but for evidence. Proof that you've already done impossible things before. Most people do the opposite. We collect our failures. We replay embarrassment, rejection, every mistake, on a loop. David decided to collect his victories instead, not because his life had been easy, but because he refused to forget what he'd already survived. That mindset carried him through Hell Week twice, actually, since injuries forced him to restart the entire program from day one on a second attempt, with a torn leg wrapped in duct tape, still running. And then it carried him all the way to graduation. David Goggins became a United States Navy SEAL. For most people, that would be the finish line. Mission accomplished. For David, it was the opposite, because he'd learned something dangerous about himself. The second he got comfortable with any success, he stopped discovering what he was actually capable of. His next challenge wouldn't be on a battlefield. It would be on a 100-mile stretch of desert, where pain wasn't the obstacle. It was the entry fee. Part 5. The 40% Rule. After becoming a SEAL, David found a new mountain to climb: ultra-endurance racing. His training partner suggested he raise money for the families of fallen SEALs by running an ultramarathon. David wanted entry into Badwater 135, widely considered one of the hardest races on Earth. The race director told him flatly, "No shortcuts. First, prove you can finish 100 miles. David had 3 days' notice and 0 training. He'd been sitting behind a desk, not running. He showed up anyway. By mile 50, his body was already falling apart. His feet were blistered and bleeding. By mile 70, he collapsed completely. His wife had to peel his socks off, broken toenails, blood, skin torn to shreds. He soiled himself from the sheer physical breakdown. And through it all, that old question kept surfacing. Why am I doing this? The first time he'd asked it, in Hell Week, he had an answer. This time, the answer had changed. He wasn't running for the fallen SEALs anymore, or for a charity, or for anyone watching. This had become a fight between him and his own mind. How much pain could he actually take? Was he going to quit or fight? He reached into the cookie jar. Every past victory became fuel. Mile by mile, he pushed forward, 81, 90, 95, and finally, with no training, running on pure will, he crossed 101 miles. His body was wrecked. Blood, exhaustion, a real risk of kidney failure. He refused to go to the hospital. He wanted to feel the pain. To him, that pain was the trophy. And here's the realization that came out of that race, the idea Goggins is most famous for, the 40% rule. The theory goes like this. We all have a governor in our brain, just like the speed limiter in a car. Pain, fear, discomfort, and our own comfort zone combine to convince us we've hit our absolute limit. But according to Goggins, when your mind is screaming that you've given everything you've got, you've actually only tapped about 40% of your real capacity. There's another 60% still sitting there, untouched. He kept testing that theory. He ran the Brutal Hurt 100 in Hawaii, through rainforest, mud, and mountain trail, finishing nearly broken, 9th out of only 23 finishers. He trained obsessively for Badwater, running in Death Valley heat, wearing 5 layers of clothing just to acclimate his body to the punishment ahead. Then he ran the actual race, 135 miles through the desert, and finished 5th in just over 30 hours, chasing legendary ultra-runner Scott Jurek the entire way. Every time, the pattern repeated. His body would hit what felt like an absolute wall, and every time, there was still more underneath it. His conclusion wasn't really about running. It was about all of us. Most people stop the moment their mind says, "I'm done." School, work, relationships, anything hard. But that voice is lying. You're rarely as finished as you think you are. The mind quits first. The body has more left than you'll ever know, unless you're willing to go find it. Part 6. A hole in his heart. At what should have been the peak of his career, David's resting heart rate started spiking out of nowhere. Simple tasks would push his heart to 150 beats per minute. Doctors ran tests and found something he'd been born with and never known about. A hole in his heart. An atrial septal defect. His entire life, every SEAL evolution, every 100-mile race, every impossible physical feat, he'd been running on roughly half the oxygen a normal person has. His doctor told him plainly, "Everything you've done up to this point is a miracle." Here's what makes this moment different from every other setback in the book. Up to now, every obstacle had the same shape. Push through the pain, and the body finds more. That was the entire philosophy. But this wasn't fixable by mindset. No amount of willpower reroutes blood flow. For the first time, David ran straight into a wall that discipline alone couldn't break through. This one needed a scalpel. He needed surgery. The first attempt didn't fully work. His heart went back into arrhythmia weeks later, forcing a second operation. The Navy suggested he retire and play it safe. David refused. While he waited months for a second doctor, he threw himself into the most boring administrative work the Navy had to offer, because staying sharp, even in tasks that meant nothing to him, meant refusing to become a victim of his own circumstances. Walking into his second heart surgery, he asked himself one final question. If nothing about this ever gets fixed, could I actually be happy just retiring right now? The answer, from somewhere deep inside him, was simply no. That no is the whole book in one word. His body could break. His heart, literally, was broken. But the mind games never stopped. Once he recovered, David turned his focus to something almost absurd, breaking the Guinness World Record for most pull-ups in 24 hours. His first attempt, filmed live on national TV, fell apart. Cameras, crowd pressure, an unstable pull-up bar. His hands blistered and tore open. He stopped at just over 4,000, far short of his goal, and failed on live television. He didn't feel shame. He sat down and analyzed exactly what went wrong. Wrong environment, wrong bar. Too much focus on the cameras, not enough on the pull-ups themselves. 1 year later, David got a call late at night. His estranged half-brother's daughter had been shot and killed. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. But when the family showed up, all the old resentment just disappeared. They held each other and grieved together. That night, something settled in him. Life is suffering. Everyone gets their share of pain. Nobody escapes it. Most people respond by building comfort zones, safe little boxes they never leave. For a while, that box feels like protection. But eventually, comfort becomes a cage. The people who dare to imagine something bigger than that box feel pain the moment they step outside it. Most retreat back in. The ones who don't, the ones who stay outside and keep taking the pain, are the ones who actually change. Goggins says the biggest enemy was never his father, never the racism, never the injuries or the failed attempts. The biggest enemy was always the doubt inside his own head. And the way he learned to fight that doubt was with 2 words. What if? What if I actually can do this? That question alone is enough to make the impossible feel possible. Enough to take your pain, your flaws, your worst chapters, and turn all of it into fuel instead of shame. Today, David Goggins is in his 40s, still running, still pushing, still chasing a version of himself he hasn't fully met yet. He says the growth never actually ends. There's no finish line waiting at the end of this. Every failure, every future win gets the same treatment. Full effort, no excuses, and one simple question thrown back at anyone who says it's impossible. So here's what this book is actually about, underneath all the pull-ups and ultramarathons. David Goggins was born into a house where love and violence lived under the same roof. He was told, over and over, by teachers, by his own father, by the voice in his own head, that he was born to fail. And for most of his childhood and early 20s, he believed it. What changed wasn't a single moment of inspiration. It was a mirror, a brutal, honest look at himself, followed by thousands of small, uncomfortable choices repeated daily for years. Losing 100 pounds in 3 months, surviving Hell Week twice, running 100 miles with no training, rebuilding his life after open-heart surgery, breaking a world record with his hands torn open. None of it happened because he was gifted. He says it himself. He's not a genius, not naturally talented. What he had was a willingness to sit in pain longer than anyone else was willing to, and a refusal to let his own mind lie to him about what he was capable of. The 40% rule, the cookie jar, the accountability mirror. These aren't tricks for elite athletes. They're tools for anyone standing in front of a version of themselves they don't like yet. Anyone who's been told, by someone else or by their own mind, that this is just who they are. Goggins would tell you that's a lie. You've probably got a lot more than 40% left. The only way to find out is to stop trusting the voice that tells you to stop. That's Can't Hurt Me. The story of a man who turned his worst chapters into fuel, one uncomfortable decision at a time. If this one hit you, let me know in the comments. Was it the childhood story that got you, or the 40% rule? If you want more raw, real book breakdowns like this every week, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because next time we're diving into a completely different book, one that might challenge how you see yourself. Thanks watching English Audiobook Summary. I'll see you in the next episode.